Okay, the Mishnah on DAF Pei Beis Amud Aleph says as follows: Hatinoko sein ma'anen osan b'yom haKippurim, avol mechanchen osan lifnei shana v'lifnei shnasayim bishvil sheyihiyu regilin b'mitzvos. Children are not obligated to fast, and we do not require their parents to deprive the children of food. However, it is proper to educate the children either a year or two before they become of age, so that they should become used to doing mitzvahs by the time they're bar or bat mitzvah. Now what this means, of course, it means that we educate them to fast, the details of which we'll discuss presently. The Gemara now says, Hashta bifnei shtayim mechanchin lahu bifnei shana mibaya. The language of the Mishnah is imprecise. Why do you have to tell me a year or two before? Just if you're supposed to educate them 2 years before, then surely you educate them a year before. Amar Rav Chisda lo kasha ha bechola ha bebari. The answer is there are two different kinds of children based on their health. Healthy children should start fasting 2 years before bar or bat mitzvah. So for a girl it would start at age 10, boy start at age 11. And if they're not so healthy, meaning like, they're skinny and they're sort of like a weak constitution, so then only do a year before the bar or bat mitzvah. Amar Rav Huna ben chesu ben tes mechanchin oso l'sha'os ben yud ben yud aleph mashlimin midirabanan ben yud beis mashlimin midioraisa bitinokes. I read that all together because Rav Huna's statement is all talking about a girl. And he's saying that since a girl becomes obligated at the age of 12, midioraisa, to start fasting, so we start her training actually 4 years before. Either at the age of 8 or 9, she should start fasting for a portion of the day, which means we just delay the first meal of the day. So instead of eating breakfast at the regular hour, push it off an hour or two so that she gets the idea that she's supposed to fast a portion of the day. That's if she's healthy. If she's not healthy, start at the age of 9. Once you get to an older age, so if she's healthy, she should start fasting the full day at age 10. If she's not so healthy, she should start fasting at age 11. But once she gets to 12, she's obligated midioraisa.
Doesn't it say bat?
What?
If he's talking about a girl, why does it say bat? What then?
That's a good question. Ben is, I guess, the generic term for either gender. But it's clear that at the last statement he's talking about betinokes. It's a good point. The Rav Nachman Omar ben Tes ben Yud mechanchin osan l'shaos ben Yud Aleph ben Yud Beis mashlimin midirabanan ben Yud Gimel mashlimin midioraisa betinok. Rav Nachman is not disagreeing with Rav Huna. He's just talking about a male, whereas Rav Huna was talking about a female. So everything we said before for a female applies to a male just 1 year further along, because the bar mitzvah is at 13 instead of 12. So therefore he's obligated midioraisa to fast at 13. So you move back 4 years for a healthy kid and you start training him at the age of 9 to start fasting for a poor part of the day. If he's not so healthy, start at age 10. By the age of 11, if he's healthy, he should fast the full day. And if he's not so healthy, then by the age of 12, he should fast the full day. V'Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Hashlama d'Rabbanan Leka, Ben Yud Aleph Mechanchen Oso L'Sha'os, Ben Yud Beis Mashlimin Midioraisa, Bitinokes. So Rabbi Yochanan fundamentally disagrees with both Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. And he says there's no such thing as training a child to fast for the full day before bar or bat mitzvah. He says either a year or two before the bar or bat mitzvah, you have them fast only a portion of the day, but not the full day. So therefore, if it's a healthy girl, so at the age of 10 she should fast a portion of the day. If she's not so healthy, then she should fast the portion of the day only starting at age 11. But this idea of fasting the full day, says Rabbi Yochanan, is not true. So Tanan, let's look now at our Mishnah. Hatinokos ein ma'anin osan b'yom haKippurim, aval mechanchin osan lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim. So the language over here, by the way, there are a number of different ways of learning the next several lines, and we're going to learn like the Gra, And it's a little bit unclear as to where the language implies the way the Gra is learning it. But the Gra seems to say that the words lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim doesn't really address specifically before bar or bat mitzvah, because it doesn't say samuch lepirkan. It doesn't say right before they reach puberty or right before they become of halachic age. But rather it just says lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim, a year or two before. So before what? So it doesn't really specify. This indicates to us that there are several points of before, even more than just the year or two that are being discussed by the Mishnah. So Bishlam al Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim, lifnei shana l'divreihem v'lifnei shtayim l'divreihem. It works out well according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, who say that there are several years before. There's 4 years before for a healthy kid for partial fasting, 3 years before for a not so healthy kid partial fasting, and then 2 years before and 1 year before for a full day fasting. So then I could understand. So lifnei shana l'divreihem v'lifnei shnayim l'divreihem. So then what it means is that a full day of fasting a year in advance, according to the Chachamim who say that you should fast a full day, right? In other words, l'divreihem, meaning that only according to their words who say that you should do it a full day, which means that there's other fasting that precedes that is not a full day. And Elul Rabbi Yochanan kasha, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, the language is somewhat difficult, because the language, as I mentioned, at least the way the Gra understands the Gemara, seems to imply that there's additional periods before the full day of fasting. Amar Lacha Rabbi Yochanan, Mai Shana Oshtayim Samoch Lepirkan. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, Lifnei Shana v'Lifnei Shnasayim of the Mishnah doesn't mean a year or two before, or, one of the other ways that you could possibly learn the Gemara is Lifnei Shana v'Lifnei Shtayim, a year or two before they start fasting a full day, which would imply that there's partial fasting well before the year or two before. But Rabbi Yochanan basically learns that lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim, which is talking about fasting a portion of the day, means a year or two before bar or bat mitzvah. And that's the way he's going to stick to it. In other words, even though according to the way that the Gemara had originally understood it, lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim imply that there's multiple years of training before the bar bat mitzvah, Rabbi Yochanan says no. Lifnei shana v'lifnei shtayim means a year or two before bar bat mitzvah. That's the only time when you educate them. Toshma, so come and listen to the language of the Brisa. The Tani Rabba Bar Shmuel, Tinokos ein ma'anin osan b'yom haKippurim, avol mechanchin osan shana oshtayim samach lepirkan. So comes along the Brisa and says that for a girl, we do not afflict them on Yom Kippur before their bat mitzvah, but we do educate them a year or two right before the bat mitzvah. This is more indicative of Rabbi Yochanan, because here the only educational experience that is indicated by the Brisa is very close to the bat mitzvah, a year or two before. So Bishlam la Rabbi Yochanan nicha el Rav Huna la Rav Nachman kash. But according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, it's difficult to understand, because they say that the educational experience starts a full 4 years for a healthy kid and 3 years for an unhealthy kid. So Amri L'cha Rabbanan, my chinuch nami deketani hashlama. So the Rabbanan will tell you that no, that brisa makes sense according to us, because the word mechanchin over there doesn't mean that we start their educational process of fasting, but that we educate them to fast the full day. But actually their education and fasting starts well before that period. But as far as educating them to fast the full day, that starts a year or two before. Frak the Gemara, umi kari l'chinuch hashlama. Since when do we call education a full day fasting? The word chinuch doesn't imply full fasting. Education implies only part of the day fasting, because v'hatanya, I'll show you. Eze chinuch, what is the definition of education? Hayarag yelechol b'shtei shos machilin oso l'shalosh b'shalosh machilin oso ba'arba. That if the child was used to normally eating at 8 a.m., we feed him breakfast at 9 a.m. If he's used to eating breakfast at 9 a.m., we feed him at 10 a.m. So you see that education in the context of Yom Kippur means only a partial day fast, not a full day fast. Amar Rava bar Ula trei chinuchi havi. No, that's not a problem. There are two types of education. The word chinuch is generic enough to be able to include both part of the day fasting and full day fasting. So therefore, that's the way that the Chachamim will interpret that brisa. Bottom line is, as Rashi points out, that we go like the Chachamim and like Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, and we begin educating a child 4 years before the bar mitzvah with partial fasting, assuming that the child is healthy. So really beginning at age 9 for a bar mitzvah and at age 8 for a bas mitzvah, do we say that the education begins of foregoing the meal? In other words, the first meal of the day, breakfast, should be foregone for an hour or 2 hours, depending upon what the child is capable of doing. And then, once the child reaches 2 years before the bar bat mitzvah, that's when we encourage the child to fast the whole day.
That's not the halacha, though, is it?
Yeah, I think it is.
2 years?
Yeah, I believe so, if I'm not mistaken. Unless the child is not healthy, then we get the child to then when the child's 12. Okay, Mishnah. Ubra shehericha ma'achilan oso ad shetashuv nafsha. Next Mishnah talks about a pregnant or sick person. If a woman is pregnant on Yom Kippur, she still has to fast. But let's say she smells an aromatic food, and all of a sudden she has a craving. She says, "Oy, I need to eat something. Give me some of that food that I'm smelling." So we feed it to her until she comes back to herself. Chole ma'achilan oso al pi bekiyan. And the reason why we do this is because Rashi explains that when a woman has a craving, really, what is it? It's the fetus who smells the food, and the fetus says to his mother, telepathically or however it works, "I need that food." That causes the woman to say, "Oi, I need that food." And if you don't feed her, then it's both a sakana to the fetus and to the mother.
Does that make sense biologically?
I think it makes great sense to me.
It could be they're missing a nutrient in their body, and the body automatically, and the fetus needs it. It draws it from the mother. No.
I remember back in school, these professors were relating sires. Just this point, they were saying that they were doing research on this physiologist a long time ago, so it's probably more relevant.
It makes great sense to me, having seen my wife a number of times. Okay. Now, if a person is sick, then we first consult with the medical experts in order to determine whether we need to feed him. If there are no medical experts available, then we consult with the patient himself. If the patient says, "I need to eat," and if not, "I think I'm going to die," so then we feed him until he says, "Must speak," until he says enough. Tanu Rabbana. Ubra shehiricha b'sar kodesh o b'sar chazir, tochvin la kush berotev o menichan la alpia. Here the Bryce is not talking specifically about Yom Kippur, it's talking about a pregnant woman who smells an aromatic food that is asur. So either it's sacrificial meat or it's pig meat, and she's chalashing. So we take a little toothpick, we stick it in the gravy of that food, and then we place that toothpick on her lips, not to let, just enough so that she gets a little bit of a taste of it. Im nisyash v'dai mutav, if that's enough to satisfy her, well and good. But if not, then we'll let her have some of the gravy. Not the actual mamashus, not the actual meat itself, but just the tam, the flavor that's absorbed out into the gravy. And if that's enough to calm her down, great. But if not, we actually give her a gesunta piece of bacon. What's that phrase, Shlomi? Until it's running down your... If you're going to eat... Right, when you're going
to the juices.
Then the juices run down the sides of your mouth, right? If once you're going to eat it, you might as well enjoy it, right? Anyway, so we give her the actual piece of meat if that's the only thing that will mollify her. Because there is nothing that stands in the way of preserving life in Judaism other than the 3 cardinal sins, which we're all familiar with: idolatry, sexual crimes, and murder. those three things, if the prospect is either to commit that sin or to let yourself die, you have to let yourself die. But in all other halachos, you preserve life at the expense of the mitzvah. Avodah Zarah minol, and how do we know that this is true by idolatry, that it's one of the three cardinal sins? Detanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Im nemar b'chol nafshecha lama nemar b'chol meodecha, v'im nemar b'chol meodecha lama nemar b'chol nafshecha. That why does the Torah have to say love Hashem with both your nefesh and with all your might? What's the difference between the two? Elalomar lecha im yesh lecha adam shegufo chaviv alav mimamono lekach nemar b'chol nafshecha im yesh lecha adam shemamono chaviv alav migufo lekach nemar b'chol meodecha. The answer is that this is the ultimate mitzvah, loving Hashem. Whatever is most precious to you is what you have to sacrifice in order to demonstrate your love to Hashem. For some people, the ultimate price is their life, and for some people, the ultimate price is their assets. But depending upon what kind of person you are, it's either nafshecha or ma'odecha, but the bottom line is that a person has to be willing to pay the ultimate price of giving up his life in order to demonstrate his love for Hashem. And the love of Hashem is demonstrated by never forsaking Hashem for any other object of worship, which is the ultimately what idolatry is, what avodah zarah is. So that's how we know that you have to pay the price, the ultimate price, in order to avoid avodah zarah. Gili arayas u'shvichus damim minolan, and where do we know sexual crimes and murder? That those are the other two cardinal sins. Detanya Rabbi Omer ki ka'asher yakum ish al reyehu uritzacho nefesh ken hadavar hazeh. The Torah talks about rape of a married woman. And the Torah says that in that situation you execute the rapist, but to the girl you don't, because she didn't do anything wrong, and the Torah analogizes it to murder. Just like when a man murders his fellow, so too is this thing. She's the victim, just like a man who is a victim of murder is the victim. So v'chima inyan lamadnu merotzech lenara hameorasa. Why does the Torah have to create this analogy? Ela hareza bolalamed v'nimtza lamed. The answer is that it's a bilateral kind of analogy, meaning that you're going to apply halachas from murder to rape, and you're going to apply halachas of rape to murder. Let's see. Ma nara hameorasa nitein lahatzila benafsho, af rotzeach nitein lahatzila benafsho. That just like a nara hameorasa, the Torah says by a case of rape, ve'ein moshiala, there is no one to save her. That implies that if there is someone to save her, you have to save her at all costs, even if it means killing the rapist. So you see that you have to save a victim, even if it means killing the perpetrator by rape, and that's the same thing true by murder. If you see a guy who's roidef after someone else, and the only way to save the potential victim is by killing the perpetrator, that's what you have to do. So that's what you learn from Nara HaMa'orasa to apply to cases of murder. Now we go the other direction. Ma rodzeach yahareg val yavor, af Nara HaMa'orasa yahareg val yavor. And just like by the case of murder, a person has to give up his life before he commits murder, so too, by the case of rape, a man who's told to rape in order to save his life has to give up his life in order to avoid raping. By the way, Rashi points out something very interesting over here. He says that only applies to a man. If a man is told rape or you will be murdered, he has to let himself be killed. If, however, a woman is told, allow yourself to be raped or be killed, she is allowed to allow herself to be raped in order to avoid execution. And the reason for that is we learn this from Esther, who allowed herself to be raped by Achashverosh in order to avoid being killed and to be able to help realize the divine plan. But the reason why is because Esther karka oilam haisa. A woman is a passive victim, or a man is an active victim if he's committing an act of rape.
Why did he not jump ship on the way to Rome? Because we're afraid of being raped.
Right. So that's a good question. It seems that there are times that martyrdom is called for, even when it's not required according to these criteria. Right. Okay. So now the Gemara says, "V'rotzeach gufei minola." Where do we know that if you're faced with kill or be killed, you have to let yourself be killed. Where do we know that there's such a halacha? So svarahi, it's a svara. Dehahu da'asa lekame derabba amar li more doroi katle leplanya ve'ilo katil nalach. That a man once came to Rabba. This illustrates the point. And this man told Rabba, I was told by the provincial leader that I either have to kill a certain person or he's going to kill me. So what should I do? That's my shaila. So Rabba said, you have to let the leader kill you instead to prevent. And you don't have a right to kill someone else to save your own life. So Amarlei niktalach velo siktal, because my chaz is the dama didach somak tfei dilma dama deahu gavra somak tfei. And the logic is, who's to say that your blood is any redder than your fellow? Right? Maybe his blood is redder than yours. And like Rashi points out, the whole reason why Hashem allows us to violate the Torah in order to save our lives is because a Jewish life is more precious than any one individual mitzvah. But that's only true when the violation doesn't involve the taking of another Jewish life. If the violation of the mitzvah involves taking another Jewish life, then you can't say that my life is more precious than that other life. Right? You can say that my life is more precious than Shabbos. My life is more precious than Kashrus. But you can't say that my life is more precious than someone else's life. So therefore, that's the rationale by saying that you can't kill in order to save your life. Hahu ubera da'archa asu. By the way, this has many qualifications that you should just be thinking about. Like the Gemara in Bava Metzia says, if two people are walking in the desert and I have a flask of water and he doesn't, I'm not mechuyev to martyr myself by sharing my water with him if it means that both of us will die, right? So there's a difference between actively killing to save your life versus martyring yourself in order to save someone else's life. I'm not mechuyev to be a martyr, but I'm also not allowed to actively kill someone to save my life. So just think about that. So now the Gemara says, Hahi ubra da'archa asu lakami de Rebbe. There was once a pregnant woman who came before Rebbe on Yom Kippur. She says, Rebbe, I'm chalashing, I need to eat. So Amar lahu zilu l'chu shula de yoma de kippurehu. So Rebbe said, whisper into this woman's ear that today is Yom Kippur. Maybe that'll calm her down. So l'chu shula v'ilchisha. They did so, and she calmed down, and she said, I'm okay. So Kari alei b'terem ertzacha barbeten yedaticha uveterem teitzei merechem ikdashticha navi lagoyim nesaticha. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyah which says that God says, even before, God says to Yirmiyah, even before you were formed in the womb, I sanctified you and I knew you. So Rebbe was basically saying, this fetus, which caused you to have the craving, he must be a Heiliger fetus, because he knows once it was explained to him that it's Yom Kippur, he stopped his cravings. So the Gemara says, Nafak Mina Rabbi Yochanan. And Taka, who did that fetus grow up to become? Become the Heiliger Rabbi Yochanan. Hahi ubra da'archa asulakami de Rabbi Chanina. Amar lahu l'chushula velo ilchisha. There was once a similar incident that happened with Rabbi Chanina. A woman was chalish and she says, I need to eat. He said, whisper to her that it's Yom Kippur. They did so, but she did not calm down. She still needed the food, so they gave her to eat. So Kari alei zoru rishoy merechem nafek mina shabtai otzar peri. So Rabbi Chanina said there's a different pasuk that talks about a person being a rasha from the womb. Obviously, this fetus does not have the fortitude of spirit to be a tzaddik because he's not calming down, even though we explained to him that it's Yom Kippur. And as Taka, it turned out that person grew up to become a bad guy. His name was Shabtai Otzar Peri, Shabtai, the hoarder of commodities. And the Gemara, Rashi explains that the Gemara says that in Eretz Yisrael it is usher to artificially inflate commodity prices by hoarding goods, by hoarding grain and so forth, because by doing so you're impoverishing the inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore this fellow Shabtai went ahead and violated that principle, and he hoarded goods and created havoc with the Israeli economy, and that's why he grew up to become a rasha. Now this Gemara is fraught with theological difficulties, because ultimately what it's suggesting is that there's a predisposition even from the womb to determine whether you're going to be a tzaddik or a rasha. I'm not going to touch that right now. I just wanted to raise the issue. Let's go on. If a person is sick, we consult with medical experts in order to be able to feed him. Let's say you have a dispute between the sick person and the doctor. The sick person says, I'm chalashing, and if I don't eat, I think I'm going to die. The doctor says, you're being melodramatic, right? The doctor says, you're fine, you'll be fine. So in that situation, guess who you listen to? You listen to the patient. My taima leiv yodeya moras nafsha, like the pasuk in Mishlei says, only the heart knows its own bitterness of its soul, and so the patient knows better, right? That's what doctors will tell you today. By the way, no, there's a greater humility among the medical community today. Sometimes a doctor will say, "Listen, you're the patient. You have to decide," right? Pishita. So the Gemara says, "Isn't that obvious?" No, because ma'udatema rofe kim leitfei kamash malan. That you might have thought that the doctor knows best, and the answer is no, the doctor does not know best. The patient knows what he's going through. Rofe omer tzarech v'chola omer eino tzarech shomin l'rofe. But if the doctor says, you need to eat, and the patient says, no, I'll be fine, you listen to the doctor, and you forcibly compel the person to eat. My time because we assume that the sickness is causing you to have a meshuganer thought that you'll be okay when you're really like a person who's anorexic and thinks they're fat, right? That's the same thing that's going through this sick person. By the way, this is not a joke. If a girl has anorexia, we would forbid her from fasting on Yom Kippur. This is a practical halacha, and unfortunately, I've had to deal with. We tell the girl, no, you're mechuyev to eat because it's a sakana. She says, what are you talking about? I'm fat. I'm not hungry. That's what means the Gemara tunva. It's a mishagas. Tanan. The Mishnah says chole ma'achilon oso al pi bekiyin. So now let's look at our Mishnah. The Mishnah seems to contradict both statements of Rabbi Yana. Number one, it says that if a person is sick, we only feed that sick person based on medical experts, al pi bekiyin and al pi atzmolo, which means that we don't listen to the opinion of the patient. So that's question number one. And question number two is al pi bekiyin and al pi baki echad lo. And furthermore, you Rabbi Yanai had said that all you need is one doctor. And the Mishnah seems to imply you need two doctors. So how do you reconcile both questions? So to answer the first question, we're dealing with a case where the patient himself says, I'm fine, I don't need to eat. That's where the Mishnah says, you listen to the Biki and you listen to the medical experts. What about the second question? Why do you need two medical experts? Why not you only use one? Lo tzricha deika achrina bahadei da omar lo tzarich. So the answer is that there's not just one medical expert. There's another medical expert who says no, the patient will be fine. So in that situation, ma'achilin oso al pi bekiyin. So the Gemara says that in that situation, if it's one against one, so then you need a second one to decide the issue. So here I think the word pshita is not to be taken in the normal pshita sense, but the Gemara is saying, what do you mean? Even if it's one against one, you should listen to the doctor who says to feed him, because safik nefashosu, the safik nefashos lahakil, you always go and err on the side of caution. So why do you need two medical experts? Even if you have one doctor who says the patient is fine, you should still listen to the one doctor who says the patient needs to eat. The Gemara answers, Lo tzricha di'ika trei achrina bahadei da'amri lo tzarich. The answer is that we've got two medical experts who say the patient is fine. That's where the Mishnah says that you need two medical experts to at least even out and create a 50-50 safek to say that no, you should feed the patient. Even though normally we say that it's not a numbers game, that two witnesses in court cases are as effective as 100, there's no such thing as outnumbering one side over the other, so why do you need to have it even out? But that's only true as far as testimony. But as far as evaluation of a situation, then you go according to the number of votes. But over here, it's a case of safek nefashos, and with safek nefashos, as long as you just even out the odds, you would always err on the side of caution and make sure that the patient eats, as long as it's an even vote going in both directions. I believe that's the cadence of the Gemara. That's the Shakel Vataria, and we'll continue this discussion in the Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow.
When you're allowed to eat, you have to eat like